everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Lita. I'm the events manager here for Barnes & Noble at the Grove. We're here tonight celebrating the release of Collaborate or Perish, the new book by Zach Tumin, Bill Bratton, and we've got the fabulous Patt Morrison here, courtesy of Los Angeles Times, KPCC, and a whole lot more. Let's give them a really, really warm welcome, please.
Thanks, everybody. There's still, I think we still have some seats, and we have other members of the LAPD command staff coming. And
we're going to have a senior staff meeting here tonight.
I think we have a quorum
So
for
it's
it.
the chief of ICE.
I've talked to Chief Bratton so often on my radio program. Of course, anybody in Los Angeles during his years as chief knows him so well. And I have to say, when I saw the title of this, I thought, you know, this is an editor at work, because if it was really Bill Bratton writing this, it would be Collaborate or Die. So they toned you down a little, did they?
That's that.
The whole idea of collaboration sometimes runs headlong into the notion of American rugged individualism. And so while in companies, in government, in any agency we do collaborate, the idea of a collaborative model maybe is something a little different. And that's what they're talking about here tonight. Chief Bratton from his experiences in policing, and Zach Tumin from his experiences talking with companies, watching companies throughout his career and his writing. So gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So you've got a microphone for each of you if you want to pick them up so you don't let me dominate what's going on. Surely you're going to interrupt me once in a while. The subtitle is Reaching Across Boundaries in a Networked World. And the first thing that occurs to me is that collaboration is a very old process, but it's one that now has new tools for doing it. And you talk about some of these tools. They're technical tools, but there are also all sorts of different sort of stratification tools that we now have working in a more human sense than we have before, between the walls that people tend to put up and the walls that they want to take down. I don't know who wants to start with that. Maybe Zach? Or
Zach, why don't you kick off and I'll try to fall into you.
Well,
the idea for the book was Zach's, so the idea, man, not mentioned it.
thank you, Pat, and thank you, Bill, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. So the idea of the book is collaboration is something that we have been doing for a long time. We've been doing it as long as we've been hunting mastodons. But something is different about today. Today we have technology that has changed everything. Things are moving faster, change is happening faster. And in the book we talk about how people can master this new world, a world where we're all digitally enabled with devices in our pockets and webs and all the information systems that we have to do something faster, better, cheaper, something more wonderful, something more productive together than we can possibly ever achieve alone.
what is the resistance to collaboration? It's a great idea, as you say. It goes back to to early humans, but episode after episode in this book is about people putting the brakes on, saying, no, not me, not here.
Human nature. I was smiling as I was listening to Jack, because it just prompted a couple of memories. I can remember in 2002, 2003, just after coming to the LAPD, we instituted Blackberries, and how the members of the department who were given Blackberries wanted to run like hell away from them because they didn't understand them. They didn't really get the idea of texting and instant messaging, and that it took a while to basically have them embrace the vision of Blackberries, the idea of being able to instantly message everybody at the same time and not have to do it by voicemail or by voice. It took them a while to get used to it. Now try getting the Blackberries away from them, you'd have a revolution on your hand.
In fact, Councilman Tom LaBonge said, called them blueberries or whatever. But Zach, you write in the book about some of these elements of resistance, and part of it goes to the structure. We often hear that government should be run more like a business, but you have deliberate impediments that are put into place. You know, a business is not a democracy, for example. And so with a structure like the LAPD, or structures like CEO-driven corporations, how do you put collaboration into place without, you know, completely flattening an organization that really needs somebody at the top, or several somebodies at the top? You've got examples in here.
Well, Pat, you're absolutely right. We live in a time of boundary age where we're coming out of organizations that are used to doing business a certain way, and today change is moving fast and they need to adapt and do it a different way. So we're dealing with the mindset that you refer to as a mindset of it's hard to move off the status quo, it's hard to get people mobilized for change. And what we have done is we've laid out a stepwise process in the book to help people begin that process. There are eight steps to collaboration that we think are critical to success. If you follow these 8 steps, we think that the mindset can change, the culture can change, and we show stories in American industry, American government, schools and social work and policing, steel manufacturing, aluminum manufacturing, banking, important and impressive accounts of men and women who have changed the mindset and moved the world in ways they never could if they did not come together and collaborate.
Basically, Pat, what the book is several dozen stories, public sector, private sector. My contribution was stories from New York and a number of stories from the LA experience. The LA experience, we talk about the creation of JVIC, one of the first fusion centers in the country after 9/11 to start collaborating more effectively with the federal government on how to keep Los Angeles safe from terrorism. There are stories about MacArthur Park, the fiasco in 2007 on May Day, the immigrant rally, and the incredible black eye for the department, and quite frankly, me myself as chief of the department at that time. Talk about Safer Cities initiatives that were begun under Mayor Hahn, who's in the audience here today, and continued under Mayor Villalgosa. The idea of the 5 initiatives around the city to show when we applied a collaboration between government, private sector, business improvement districts, when we brought city attorney, district attorney, the county in to work on these areas, how we could make a difference. Zach talked about the 8 steps essential to a successful collaboration. That's the heart and soul of the book, the 8 steps that we believe that, not necessarily sequentially, but if you don't have them, then you're going to, in some respects, set yourself up for a failure before you start. And if I could just take a moment, Pat, to run quickly through those 8, because it just frames some of the discussion.
Everybody counted?
And, okay, if I miss one. Well, first off is to have a vision. And in the case of LA, this is an LA audience, the vision that Mayor Hahn had when he hired me was that the city could be made a much safer place, and making it a much safer place, we could also maybe begin to attack the problem of race and racial tensions in the city. It was a vision I shared, and fortunately that we were able to come together as a team to begin that process. The vision was also shared by his successor, Mayor Villalgosa. Second element is to right-size the way forward. In other words, don't bite off more than you can choose. So effectively, the Safer City Initiative, the 5 target areas, Skid Row, Baldwin Village, Hollywood, out in the valley, they were initiatives that we were going to show that with the right collaboration, the right resources, we could make a difference. And every one of them was a phenomenal success, including the turnaround at MacArthur Park. Thirdly, the idea, create a platform, make a clearing where everybody can get together. Skid Row is probably the most vivid example of that. Business improvement districts, county, city attorney, mayor's office, police department, we all got together on a common belief that if we make Skid Row a safer place, that we can make it safer for the homeless, but we can also make it safer, have a place that things could thrive for everybody. Make it pay for everybody. We're human beings. We all want to be rewarded in some way. Political reward, Mayor Hahn didn't get it for all of his troubles. He was not reelected, largely for the fact he made the right decisions for the city. I was certainly rewarded. I got a 2nd term and have received a lot of credit, along with the 9,000 cops I got to work with, that we were rewarded that the image of the department was restored. It came back because we were successful. Others were rewarded for their efforts in joining the collaboration. Have the right people with you. That's so key. The right people on the bus, wrong people off the bus, and get everybody into the right seats. And we're continually doing that. Deliver on performance. We set goals of reducing crime by 10%. Command staff, I can remember in 2002 how they kind of shuddered about the idea of goals to reduce crime. But we set goals that we thought we could manage. Mind your political support. I married Mayor Hahn and basically stuck like glue to Mayor Villaraigosa. I learned my lesson from 1996 in New York City, where I lost the support of my mayor. I was out of a job, and he went on to run for the presidency of the United States. So in terms of the political support, the collaboration that's so essential in the public sector. And lastly, you must have a passion to basically implement it. And I think, if nothing else, I would like to be known for the passion that I brought to Los Angeles when Ricky and I came here, that this was a city we thought we could make a difference in, not only in crime, but also in issues of race, and I think we, in fact, did that.
The Eightfold Path. Okay. Zach, there's something in the book that leaped out at me. It's a school principal talking, saying, most of the good things I do in my school are illegal. Which means that people do collaborative things, but outside of the structure. And you talk about the counterterrorism cooperation. For years, as people here in the audience will know, the LAPD and the FBI were at loggerheads. They didn't cooperate because you thought the more information you kept to yourself, the more power you had. If you shared it, you lost power. How do you, outside of this poor principal who says most of the good things I do are illegal, how do you break down some of those structures, whether it's a command structure in a military-like organization or a corporate structure?
Well, I think the example in the book, Pat, is the principal who's facing a budget process in the New York City Board of Education, which hampered everything that the principals thought they needed to do in order to improve performance at the school level. In that story, we talk, it's a terrific woman named Beverly Donahue, who came in to lead budget reform for Rudy Crew in New York. And she was tasked with reinventing the budget systems that principals had to use. And what she did was, she went to the users, she went to the principals. She said, you guys know how to do your jobs best. Come work with me. And began that process of building trust and creating a system that people could look at, touch, feel, and say, I can be successful at creating the change that I have believed in and that I have tried to make work all these years now as part of the organization, as part of the mission. I think it's something that Bill has done wherever he's been in New York and Los Angeles, and we see the same work in Alcoa, in Wells Fargo, in Nokia, and the other companies that we discuss in the book.
And Bill, you write in the book about how you came into the LAPD without the baggage, the institutional baggage of more than 50 years that the department has been having problems. Does it have to be the new guy phenomenon who comes in, who shakes things up to make this kind of collaboration possible?
No, not at all. That I think sometimes within an organization, individuals rise to the top. In my case, I've been, in most instances, the outsider. And every organization at some point in its history benefits from an outsider who doesn't have baggage, if you will, relationships that were formed that might not have been the best relationships or incidents in the past. And so in my case, it worked for me, but I'm so familiar with so many people who grew up in an organization and were able to take the leadership reins. Shortly after 9/11, a Cuban gunboat, 4 o'clock in the morning, sailed into Key West Harbor, moored next to the Coast Guard Marina, and then for 4 hours tried to find somebody to surrender to. There were 4 defectors in full uniform, carrying weapons, who were literally in the United States roaming our streets shortly after 9/11. And
Robin Williams hasn't made this movie yet?
well, remember, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming.
Right. Moscow's nuts, too.
What the story sets the stage for was how, shortly after 9/11, how unprepared we were as a country to deal with the terrorism that we're now facing. And the issue was that all these thousands of ships at sea and in the harbor, any one of which could have been basically at that time concerned with having a nuclear bomb on board, we didn't know where anything was. But then the collaborative effort between the Coast Guard, the Navy, the private sector, to effectively develop a system in a relatively short period of time where you could identify where every boat was and what it was and where it was coming from and where it was going. And an ultimate collaboration that is a large part of trying to keep our country safe.
You both write in the book of crisis as opportunity, and Zach, you write about communications issues after 9/11, when the attacks on the World Trade Center wiped out communications, and it was an opportunity for a new model, but there was also even resistance to that new model, even though people saw that the old one wasn't working.
Well, that's right, Pat, and the story that Pat's referring to is a story of the difficult days after 9/11. The New York Stock Exchange was ready to trade and put capital back into the markets and keep the world economy going. But they had no telecommunications. They discovered they couldn't get the telecommunications working. And it took a crisis for the New York Stock Exchange to come together in a way that it hadn't beforehand, because no one could imagine that they needed to actually build their own telecommunications system. No one could imagine that there'd be planes flying into the World Trade Center that would send girders tumbling thousands of feet down and slicing through 5 stories underground to snap the Verizon cables that were nonetheless sitting in PVC piping. And no one knew that they were in PVC piping, and no one knew that the telecommunications infrastructure in the Wall Street area didn't have redundancy and didn't have the kind of backup that they thought and that they required. But at that time, then finally, the New York Stock Exchange took advantage of that crisis, and it took leadership. I think we've got stories in the book of crisis being a way. It doesn't have to be, as Bill can share, it doesn't have to be a crisis of 9/11 proportions. It can be a crisis of confidence. It can be a crisis of identity. Who are we? And are we doing what we've set out to do? There are many crises that then leaders can take advantage of, and I think Bill can address this, to move change through an organization in a way that is enduring and that could never be moved under other circumstances.
The MacArthur Park may be a good example that people here will resonate with.
2 examples, actually, that one, certainly MacArthur Park is very well known in the sense of the circumstances on that day where the peaceful demonstration, 7,000 people in the lawful demonstration, that demonstration was interrupted by the Los Angeles Police Department. And a phenomenal black guy force, but coming out of that crisis, using that crisis to basically effectively continue the reform of the organization, to speed up the reform of the organization by showing, one, that the department could investigate itself more thoroughly with our intimacy about our procedures than any outside blue ribbon panel. And so several months later, when the report was issued about what had gone on and what had gone wrong, the report was applauded for its transparency, its honesty, its analysis of what had gone right, not much, what had gone wrong, a lot. And so out of that crisis, from my perspective, the most significant crises I faced in almost 40 years of policing, came what I would describe as almost one of my finest hours. And when I say my, I don't mean me singularly, but rather the Los Angeles Police Department that I was representing as chief, that the department had showed clearly that it had turned a corner in that its history of always not accepting blame for anything that had gone wrong, now was accepting blame for what had gone wrong and causing it to go wrong, but as importantly, had found ways to now address the identified problems and was correcting them on its own without an outside commission. And it was truly, from my perspective, the department's finest hour. Another story not widely known about the idea of using crises to speed up change is that in 2005, we were issuing the crime reports, as we always do, to the police commission each week, and we were celebrating that overall crime was continuing to go down for the 3rd year in a row. But there was a blip in the gang crime information that we also tracked in Los Angeles because of our gang problem. And that blip basically showed that for several months we'd been trending up in that category. But it was not noticed, the media was not particularly paying much attention because crime had been going down in general. We literally created a crisis, Earl Payson, you will remember this, that we, the Los Angeles Police Department, began to talk about that the gang crime issue was beginning to spiral up. We consciously brought attention to the issue, consciously created a crisis. Why? To, one, support the idea that we needed more police. The idea that the issues we are facing, while overall crime was going down, the issue of crime, gang crime, is of such concern in the city, that was beginning to trend in the opposite direction. And so with that basis, we were able to create, over the next several years, momentum that resulted in the hiring of finally 700 additional police officers and finally getting close to the 10,000 goal that was the magic goal in this city. So we created a crisis that we knew we could control, and sure enough, within several months, gang crime began to go down. And here in 2012, despite the significant budget cuts the department is facing, overall crime and gang crime continues to decline.
I want to ask you about the MacArthur Park incident, because as you point out, the history in the LAPD had been deny, 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 you know, not a problem. Did you get more credibility as a department by saying, we didn't do things right here? Did it change the standing in the regard of the LAPD in the eyes of the public that you would say, this time we screwed up?
I believe that we in fact did. As chief of department, I certainly felt it. I think the editorials, the LA Times, that has spent most of the last 50 years attacking the department, is now praising it. Is now praising it. He never did get the Pulitzer Prize for going after the LAPD. That after 50 years, they still didn't pull it off. But no, MacArthur Park, again, I think in years ahead, people look back and will see that what could have been the beginning of a turnaround going back to the old ways, effectively is the beginning of the turnaround that's now celebrated, that the department is leading the way in terms of dealing with race issues and the image of the city as a city that works.
Zach, you talk about a lot of success stories, but those were very hard-won battles, and I'm sure there was a lot of metaphorical blood and maybe some literal blood on the floor too. So you write about the headwinds, collaboration, everybody loves it, it sounds great, and when it works afterwards, everybody wants to take credit. But you write about the headwinds, the natural resistance to change and other things that any institution will put up a fight for.
Well, the status quo is always a comfort zone for many people. It's what makes change hard, as we all know. Anytime we want to make a move off a space where we know what we're doing, we know what the drill is, it's difficult. In the case of Wells Fargo, for example, Steve Ellis, who's the executive vice president for the commercial side, said, "Listen, we've got to get our commercial people onto our commercial customers onto the internet because the internet is changing, and there are going to be a lot of banks out there are going to grab our business if we don't." Well, the headwinds that he faced were he's got a bank he's got to deal with. What's a bank? A bank is a big place. It's brick and mortar. It's all steel. And it's all security and trust. That surely was what Wells Fargo was about. But at the same time, he had to go and make that move onto the internet. And how did he do that? He worked with the chief executive officer at the time, Richard Kovacevic, and Kovacevic had this vision. He looked around, he saw exactly what Ellis saw. The downtown district of San Francisco that was in the heart of the dot-com boom. And his idea was, if I can get an organization that has this look and feel of the internet, at the same time it's got roots in the brick and mortar bank, then I can create that new hybrid organization that has the promise of security and safety that Wells Fargo has always offered. At the same time, we can move quickly and fast at the speed of the internet that our customers want. Very successful. They went from $1 trillion in transactions, up less than $1 trillion when they started off in 2000. Within a year, they were on the internet. 10 years later, they're at $11 trillion in transactions on the commercial side for Wells Fargo. It's an astounding story. Steve's a great guy. It's laid out. Dick Kovacevic is an amazing CEO. The story's called $1 Billion Bet, and I hope you read it and enjoy it.
A couple of examples of what we're talking about also that we're here at Barnes & Noble tonight. They are our hosts, and they're very gracious hosts. That you may recall that one of their principal competitors was Borders, not too far up the street on Sunset Boulevard. And Borders is no longer with us. What happened at Barnes & Noble a couple of years ago, recognizing that reading was changing. People were now looking to get their news and their reading from different mediums. And so they began to invest in, when you come up the escalator, the Nook. The idea of a tablet that you could, in addition to a hardcover book, you could get the book electronically. They began to find a platform where their customers could go and be satisfied. Borders did not. Borders is out of business. They didn't keep up with the changing network world. How do you reach customers and get customers to where you want them to be to buy books? And then in terms of the world of fashion, Missoni teaming with Target. Here you have a high-end fashion house, Missoni, that basically is collaborating with a middle-income store to reach that audience base, understanding that they were not going to survive in the world economy just selling to the few thousand. They needed to sell to the 100,000s.
Can you talk about the overtime question in the prosecution, the Elizabeth Holtzman case in New York, how everybody knew that there was a problem? You smack your head because you had police officers who were sitting there waiting to be called into court, cases that were delayed, and probably nodding heads out here from a lot of law enforcement people, how that was a collaborative process and how it ended up turning out.
Zach, before you tell that story, because this is one of Zach's stories in the book, a lot of police in the audience should appreciate that in New York City in the 1980s and 90s, the federal court required the city to not take more than 24 hours to arraign a suspect. Because in some instances it was taking 48 to 72 hours. And the practice in the NYPD in those days was the arresting officer stayed with the prisoner for those 24, 48, or 72 hours. So if they arrested a $1.15 fare beater, it would cost the city literally hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to prosecute that fare evader. So one of the reasons fare evaders were not arrested was the cost, and no cop wanted, even though he's getting a lot of money for it, to spend 48 hours shackled to this character that he arrested in the subway.
So this was a story that Bill and I both knew about, but we didn't know that we each knew it. Because Bill, as a police chief executive of police organizations in New York, saw it from one perspective. I was a staff person for Elizabeth Holtzman, Brooklyn District Attorney, and I saw it from another one, and I wrote it from my perspective. But it's a story really about systems that thwart the best efforts of cops, of DAs, that thwart the best interests of victims and the criminal justice system to do the work that they all set out to do. It's a story about Chief Executive Elizabeth Holtzman, who saw these massive delays in the way that cops and DAs who needed to work together came together in the aftermath of an arrest, and said, we can do work differently. We can put up video links between us so that we don't have to have cops come down. It's costing an awful lot of overtime. And so Holtzman went to Ben Ward and said, listen, we have a better way to do it. I've got some money here. Let's put up some video links, and we can reduce the time it takes for everyone to get this done. We'll have better information. And it was a very difficult moment, I think, for the New York Police Department, because it was a time when it was a situation where the overtime was important, and he basically said, we'll do it, but you're going to send Tumin out to the precinct to explain that it's the DA that's taking the overtime out of the cops' pockets and not me. And I went out to the precincts and I did that, and I can assure you that I was not greeted warmly. But the fact is that here was a different way of doing business that ran into those same headwinds, where it paid for the city to have a different way of doing business. But at the individual level, it was very difficult for the department, and even for some DAs, to make the change.
So the department had, for even the most simple arrest, 23 different forms that had to be filled out. And there was no uniformity of basic information on each form. Each one was designed at a different time by a different person. So there was no ability to even collate the information through a machine. That was one of the things we finally accomplished in 1995. But in the 80s, it was, it's amazing the city functioned at all, the systems that they had.
Well, the fact is also, I just saw some photographs of the city in the 1980s in New York. The West Side Highway filled with weeds and cracking pavement, Bushwick half destroyed, scenes from Times Square of chaos and disruption. A dozen photographs that showed the city really in distress, and the idea that cops would then be expected to change all that just by crime fighting was unworkable. And it wasn't until the department with leadership came to believe that this problem required all of New York to come together. They might not care about some of the interests the others had, but everyone shared that same idea about safety and about improving. And it could only be done by a concerted effort led by Bill Bratton at the NYPD, which really was an incredible turnaround and transformation. But collaboration was the only way to deal with the problems that were thrown at the police department and said, you fix it. It was unfixable without that other collaboration.
We get some questions. How about it from the audience? If you'd stand up to make sure that we can hear you. Somebody?
But what if the political system or particular people or issues in the government are what you're trying to change and they're actually your obstacles? So.
Did everybody hear that? The people you want, you're trying to change the system, but the people you need to work with, politicians, are in fact the people you need to get out to make the system work in the first place. Okay?
Sounds like the city council to me. Sometimes collaboration is not easy. It is really a matter of finding, I think, my experience, and certainly Zach can speak to his own, of sometimes basically finding collaborators that can then leverage the resistance. Because the reality is there oftentimes will be resistance to change. There's a wonderful example in the book of the Alcoa Company. It's one of Zach's favorite cases. Paul O'Neill, when he was head of Alcoa, a very dangerous business making aluminum in terms of mining of it, the smelting of it, tremendous injuries to workers, terrible labor relations between the unions and the managers. And O'Neill, when he took over the company, he found a platform that he could get everybody to come onto instead of fighting with each other, which was safety. The idea that the company was going to spend whatever it would take to make a safe environment for its workers. And the union was asked to collaborate on what is it that will make a safer environment for your workers. And he achieved it. He achieved it in a very short period of time that they collaborated together. And Alcoa, for a period of time, was one of the most successful companies in the world around the issue of safety.
So you think the answer to the question is, do you find one issue that you know you can get virtually everyone to agree on and just use that as a wedge issue?
One or multiple that it's oftentimes, though, it's the idea to try to find an issue that you can get tipping point momentum around. In New York City in 1994, that issue was crime. Everybody in that city was finally fed up that they wanted something done. And that was the issue that people basically formed around. Although there were many who resisted the idea because of the lack of trust of an aggressive, assertive police department, because they were worried about what that department was going to do to civil rights issues or to fragile relationships in the city.
There's a challenge of creating trust. And trust and collaboration is essential, because in collaboration, you're giving away power, right? So you're having to share power, and it's not something that people are entirely comfortable with. Some people will say of collaboration, I'll collaborate if I'm boxed into a corner.
I'm in charge.
It's not the time to start the collaboration. The time to start the collaboration is when you have an opportunity to solve a problem that everyone feels urgent about, willing to do something about, and you can show them how to come together quickly for success and deliver some value fast in their hands. And these stories are all about creating that right-sized problem that delivers value quickly. People can see that they can be successful together, collaborating, that they can trust around an issue that matters to people, that you're not trying to boil the ocean here. You're just trying to solve a problem that's urgent, that's right-sized, and that everyone can put their shoulders against.
I was curious, you've talked a lot about the public sector and the private sector in the United States, but I was curious if you saw this method working on a global scale, and if you perhaps envisioned that the United States needed to collaborate internationally for economic or civil rights purposes.
No question that collaboration on a global scale now is essential for all the reasons that we've seen over the last decade, whether it's security, whether it's economic development, whether it's for health. I mean, today you can pick up a virus in Thailand and you'll be in New York City in 5 hours. It used to take three months for you to make that trip. Fully time for the virus to incubate, to show. Today, you can be delivering that virus onto the streets of New York, whether you mean to or not, in hours. That takes collaboration. That means moving across boundaries. That means working with health authorities, foreign services, intelligence agencies, defense, state departments. But what it means is it's essentially a set of political issues. And political issues are about negotiation, and they're about persuasion. And in the stories that we have in the book, there are wonderful accounts of men and women who are working those international boundaries for the freeing of hostages in the jungle, for example, in the Colombian rainforest, in delivering safety and security around the world and food safety. So collaboration on an international level, it works exactly the same way, the same idea. You have a vision, you get a right-sized problem, you get a platform where people can come together, you have to make it pay. Now, it doesn't always work, but there's no way these days where you can go it alone and think that you're going to, that you'll succeed.
We were talking about people getting on the bus or getting the quality people on the bus. Sometimes it's a long way between bus stops, and I think patience is like a huge issue. Don't you find that very true as far as sometimes you can't, because people want things immediately, but...
I think probably from my experience, the most vivid example of that, about the pace of change, the length of time it's going to take, the turnaround of New York City and the New York City Police Department was effectively done in 2 years, 94 to 96. It was done, and it's continued 15 years later. The turnaround in Los Angeles of the LAPD, in the sense of the cultural change, the really the department totally embracing the changes that were occurring, the city embracing the changes that were occurring, the voting to finally increase the size of the department, some of the racial situation improvements. 7 years in Los Angeles, a long way between bus stops, with a lot of different players and a lot of different seats. So that sometimes you've got a tipping point momentum that happens like that. Other times it's just the journey's a longer journey.
Thinking on a global scale, what advice would you give President Obama for collaborating with the Republicans?
Advising President Obama on collaborating with the Republicans. Who would like to take that?
I think we'd have to start with Congress with this 9% approval rating. That if you think of politics, if you think of Congress, the whole idea is collaboration. They've got a platform, they're on the floor of Congress. It used to be about coming to consensus, everybody giving up something, because there was still going to be something in it for everybody. And for whatever reason, at this particular point in our history, we don't have that. And that is I think the book, the 8 points we have, if you can get enough people to wrap themselves around those 8 points, it can be done. But the issue is right now, it's not happening.
Zach, how do you tell those stakeholders, especially real powerful stakeholders, that what you are doing is not working, whether it's Congress or the CEO?
Well, to Andy's point, and follow on to Bill's, in the book we talk about right-sizing the problems. Sometimes that means making the problems a little bigger than the one that you're handed. Sometimes you have to expand the problem to find more levers for change. If you can't work at the problem inside one sandbox, make the sandbox a little bigger. I think that's what Bill did with Comstead in New York. It wasn't a problem that the police department could work alone. It required bringing in many partners. For the United States and for the United States Congress and for the President, I would say that the levers for change are in the voting booth. And if the 435 members of Congress can't do the job that Americans need them to do, there's a lever for change that's waiting for them, and Americans have that right, and they ought to exercise it.
I actually have one about collaborations that fail, and I'm thinking of Homeland Security, where you've got 100,000 people with top secret clearances. You've got so many agencies working together that it feels almost muscle bound. Are there collaborations that are too large, that just have too much ambition and overreach?
That collaboration is still significant work in progress. I have a lot of intimacy with that. I'm the vice chair of the Homeland Security Advisory Council, Secretary Napolitano, and certainly was one of the 3 priorities of the LAPD during my time as chief, and continuing now with Chief Beck.